Alright, so I feel like some of you aren't going to like this video because Dominick Cruz is considered by most fans to be the greatest bantamweight fighter of all time, and honestly, I agree with that. His style of fighting along with his footwork is really unique, and some people would even say it's revolutionary. On top of all that, he very clearly has an analytical mind that's earned him a job as a regular UFC commentator. I want to make it clear that this video is not going to discredit his fighting ability or his legacy as a fighter, because I think that both are infallible at this point. That being said, Dominick Cruz as a man definitely has a bit of a Napoleon complex, and when you mix that in with his ego, it's made for some really insufferable moments throughout the years. The first example I want to bring up is how Cruz reacted to his loss against Henry Cejudo compared to how he reacted to his loss against Cody Garbrandt. Going into his fight against Cody Garbrandt, there was a lot of trash talk exchanged between the two, to the point where they nearly got into an altercation during fight week.
I'll come across there right now, dude. You're a room away.
Go ahead, come over here.
Yeah.
Come on, turd. Let's go.
Unhook me.
Keep in mind, this all took place in 2016, and although Cody was an undefeated prospect at the time, a large majority of fans felt confident that Dominick was going to get the win over Cody, myself included. And we all know how this fight went. Not only did Cody win, but he honestly put on a masterful performance over Cruz, beating him in a way that no one even thought was a realistic possibility. It was a great win for Cody, and I'm sure a bitter pill for Cruz to swallow. What I really want to talk about here is the post-fight press conference. To this day, this moment is regarded by UFC fans as one of the classiest displays of humility from a fighter following a loss. And at the time, I totally agreed, but I don't know, man. I don't think that this has aged all that well ever since. First and foremost, people have complimented Cruz on standing up throughout the entire press conference as he responded to the media. Fans and journalists have repeated for years now that this shows Cruz being unafraid of any questions or judgments that he might receive right after losing his belt. But to be honest, I feel like people have always gassed this up too much. Like, I guess it's neat that he was standing, but does that actually make me admire him more than it would if he was sitting? Not really, to be honest. That aside, I feel like Cruz really shined with his measured responses, heavily emphasizing how losing is a part of life, losing makes you better, and how he's going to come back from this loss better than ever.
Loss is part of life. If you don't have loss, you don't grow. This isn't tough, this is life. All I can say is I lost, and I'll take my loss like a man.
And is there any particular reason why you're not sitting down?
Why would I sit down? I'm always on my feet.
I really think that Cruz handled this press conference very well. On paper, the content of his responses were exceptional, and even though I've always thought that him standing up throughout the press conference felt a little performative, overall it was a really good look for Dominick. Now you might be asking, why do I feel like this aged badly? Well, let's fast forward to when Dominick Cruz fought Henry Cejudo. It was May of 2020, and Dominick had been on the sidelines due to injury ever since his loss to Garbrandt. It had been over 3 years since we saw Dominick in the octagon, and his first fight back would be a title shot against newly crowned champion Henry Cejudo. As we all know by now, Henry scored a second-round TKO victory over Dominick. However, there was a bit of controversy surrounding the referee Keith Peterson's decision to stop the fight, with Cruz believing it was an early stoppage. Let's just say that Dominick did not take this loss in stride at all. Keith Peterson stops the fight, and immediately Cruz starts throwing a bit of a temper tantrum. He was objecting to the stoppage and yelling at Keith, and he didn't even let Keith touch him as the official announcement was being made by Bruce Buffer. Look, he rips his hand away from Peterson's here. Anyways, in the weeks following the loss, Dominick starts going on a media rampage against Keith Peterson, where he levies some pretty serious accusations.
We remember looking at this referee, Keith Peterson, and he's like mumbling, touching the floor, like putting his fist down and then putting his fingers, and he won't look me in the eyes. And I'm like, and I'm going underneath like this to try to make sure he looks me in the eyes. And my experience of him was smelling like he had been out all night the night before, like cigarettes and alcohol.
The most serious yet hilarious accusation from Cruz is that he claimed Peterson reeked of cigarettes and alcohol while he was working in the octagon that night. He also makes the claim that Keith was totally incoherent and was avoiding eye contact with Dominick prior to the fight, basically implying that he might have been under the influence of drugs while he was refereeing a UFC title fight. On one hand, I think that these are some pretty funny and unique excuses from Cruz, but on the other hand, these are some pretty serious accusations to be making about a guy whose job it is to referee fights. I think think that we can all agree that if there was ever a referee who was visibly drunk or on drugs while he was working a fight, we would all be calling for them to get fired. The thing is, though, I'm pretty sure we all really knew that Cruz was pulling a lot of these accusations out of his ass. Like, if this was in fact true, that Keith Peterson reeked of cigarettes and alcohol, there's no way no one else would have noticed it that night. Like, no other fighters smelt anything, no other referees smelt anything, it really doesn't seem likely. Dominick continues to crucify Keith Peterson by demanding that Keith never be allowed to referee any of his fights for the rest of his career. And I agree that he has every right to at least make that request, but this all just seems so unbelievably petty. And you know what? I'll just say it, I think Dominick's behavior after the Cejudo fight was a little sad. Like, how ironic is it that the same guy who was saying loss is a part of life is now making non-stop excuses and literally trying to ruin a man's career for making what he thinks is a bad stoppage. And look, even if you truly believe that Keith Peterson made a bad stoppage that night, does that really justify Cruz doing all that he can to damage Peterson's reputation? Like, I have no opinion of Keith Peterson really, but it doesn't seem right that Cruz was trying to break this man down like that. Even John Anik had to step in and defend Peterson, saying that he doesn't agree with Dominick trying to character assassinate him. And I think that this is a big W Anik moment for sure. This seems really hypocritical to me. The way Dominick acted after losing to Henry was a very, very far cry away from Dominick making a performative grandstand after his loss to Cody. And honestly, after seeing the way Dominick carried himself following the Henry loss, I feel like it really makes Dominick look like a hypocrite for preaching humility and acceptance while he was standing up throughout that press conference. Like, it really changes the way that I look at that press conference. Like, it all just feels so performative to me now. I guess loss is a part of life only until you don't agree with the stoppage. Then you're free to try to ruin a man's career and reputation. I don't know, at least for me, all those wise words that he preached after losing to Garbrandt ring so hollow now after seeing how he reacted after he lost to Cejudo. Cruz went from saying loss is a part of life to this guy reeks of cigarettes and alcohol and that's why I lost in the span of one fight. Alright, I feel like I've made my point on this one, so let's move on. Next, I want to talk about how Dominick seems to be a questionable friend to those around him. For example, there's this pretty famous story of how Dominick Cruz and Michael Bisping almost got into a fist fight at an LA nightclub.
And I'll share a story. Me and Dominick went for a drink after Fox Sports one night, and
not this week though.
No, not this week.
Okay,
never on a work night. And Dominick's good at getting under your skin, and we are having a little altercation.
It's the best story ever.
And he's saying, you want to punch me right now, don't you, Bisping? You want to punch me? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. And he said, go on, fucking punch me. Punch me. I guarantee, by the time you try and throw one punch, I will hit you in the face 10 times. And you won't be there to hit me back. And I'm like, listen, you little shit, we're in a bar. Calm down, calm down. And he's like, no, come on, let's go. But that's what he believes. He's so confident.
You guys almost threw down in the street.
We almost threw down in the studio.
He's a 135-pounder. Fighting 185 pounds.
Calling me out. He's like, I'll fuck you up, Bisping.
And he doesn't care. That's the thing.
God bless you. You are out of your mind. You are out of your mind, Dominick Cruz, but I love it.
Basically, what ended up happening is that after shooting UFC on Fox all day, Cruz, Bisping, and a couple of other guys decided to go to the club. And after a couple of drinks, Dominick says something to Bisping that Dominick himself admits was below the belt.
I said something pretty, probably a little below the belt, and he gets a little bit upset, and he grabs me by my shirt, and he crinkles it up. He goes, listen, you little shit, I'm not going to take you talking to me like that anymore. And while he's looking at me, I kind of look behind me, and I'm like, are you talking to me or the guy behind me? First, when he was yelling at me, I was like, go ahead, Bisping. If you want to do this, we can do this right fucking now. I was like, we can do this, but I promise you, you're going to swing, you're going to miss. We're in a small place. You can't see very well. I'm going to hit you 10 times before you even hit me once. And he kind of looks at me, and he's like, he thinks about it, and he's like, I'll probably kill Dominick, but at the same time, he might have a point.
Do you think you can beat up Michael Bisping?
Abso-fucking-lutely.
So Cruz is the one who takes a personal shot at Bisping, and when Bisping stands up for himself and tries to set some boundaries, Dominick tries to turn things physical. Not only is this L-friend behavior, but it definitely gives off bully vibes as well. Thankfully, they didn't end up throwing hands that night, but Cruz makes this bizarre claim that Bisping knocked out his own brother, like straight up sleeps his brother in the middle of the nightclub.
And all of a sudden, Michael Bisping's brother comes out of nowhere, and he goes, Bisping, stop it. You're going to get us in trouble. And Bisping just, whoosh, sleeps his brother in the middle of the club, just lays him out. And then I'm like, oh my God, that could have been me. Thank God.
Wait a minute, you forgot?
I talked a little bit of sense in him.
Which Bisping and his brother both deny ever happening. I feel like that's a really weird thing to lie about. You might be saying that the story is probably just a lone example, they were drinking, this happens with guy friends sometimes, but no, Bisping literally says that Dominick does this all the time. And every time we get into a slight difference because Dominick's very opinionated, we often differ differ on opinions, and he wants to get physical. He wants to throw down. He does this all the time. If you guys don't know, I myself am a short person. In fact, I'm even shorter than Dominick Cruz. So I feel like I have the ability to spot when a fellow short guy has a Napoleon complex, and Dominick Cruz is a first ballot Hall of Famer at the Napoleon Complex Awards. I have never, not once in my life, ever gotten drunk with the boys and started escalating fights. Like, bro, you are literally the bantamweight GOAT. Do you really need to prove your masculinity through violence, especially when you caused the conflict to begin with? Alright, so the last example that I want to bring up is when Dominick called out Daniel Cormier's commentating ability. Obviously, Cruz and Cormier have been commentating UFC events for a couple of years now, and I think that they both bring different qualities to the broadcast. Frankly, I like them both as commentators, and I always figured that they were pretty close friends. But during a UFC 269 interview, Cruz was asked to review the commentating skills of his fellow commentators, and he eagerly jumped at the opportunity to shit on DC's commentary. He even goes as far to say that he mutes DC's commentary whenever DC works the broadcast, and that DC doesn't do his homework on fighters before commentating.
You've been a guy who, obviously, you're one of the analysts on the broadcast. I'm wondering, what's the experience like for you when you listen to DC and the guys actually commentate your fight? Like, knowing them personally and knowing, you know, how the sausage is made, so to speak.
When it comes to DC, you know, I usually mute it. I love DC, he's my friend, but to me, from my experience, he doesn't do the homework. He wants to get in and out, get the job done, make his money. And I think he cares about us, but it's just different. He doesn't do the preparation from my experience. He might now. I'm hoping he watches some film this time on me so that he knows what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. But I'm not gonna hold my breath on that, that's for sure.
First and foremost, this is a very unchill thing to do to your coworker, much less someone you claim as your friend. Like, if Dominick really felt this strongly about DC's commentating, he should just bring it up to him privately instead of dragging his name through the mud to the media. Dominick makes it seem like the commentator who does the most homework is the best, but in reality, commentating is a much more layered craft than that. The fun continues when shortly after Dominick's quotes become viral, Cormier and Cruz sit down in front of the cameras so that they can air out their grievances to one another. And honestly, I think that this is a great video. Whether or not you think Cruz is in the right or wrong for the comments he made about DC, I think you'll get a kick out of watching this conversation. The video starts off with Cormier immediately calling out Dom by saying that there's some things that you should and shouldn't say in a public setting, especially when it comes to colleagues and friends. Makes sense to me, but Dominick immediately starts gaslighting and says that he never said anything that DC wouldn't want to be said in public, and that he was simply holding him accountable.
But that's the problem, right? Like, that's the problem. The things we talk about privately, we aren't supposed to say in public.
And who made that?
That's what you just did.
Who made that rule?
That's our rule. You say so many things privately that I would never say publicly. We say things privately.
I never said anything.
No, you and I say things privately that we never would say publicly. And you literally.
I did not say anything that you wouldn't want me to say in public.
But you do.
I held you accountable.
No,
that's
you
different.
do. But
accountability is love.
Wait,
DC.
you do say no. It's not.
It's love.
It's love
accountability is love.
It's love only in your mind.
It's just accountability.
Listen,
it's
love.
Only love. It's a generalization. It is a generalization. Accountability is love.
No.
Yes, it is. So when you hold your kid accountable for missing something. Is it
yes,
love?
But what are you holding me accountable for?
So not only does Dom get to say whatever he wants about DC to the press, but he also gets to decide how DC should feel about it as well. Also, to say that he was only holding DC accountable doesn't really wash. Like, there's so many other ways of letting DC know that he should step his game up without saying it so publicly like he did. Then DC starts refuting Dominick's claims that he doesn't do any homework, and he admits that although he doesn't do as much research as Cruz does, he'll always study fighters before every commentating job.
You say stuff like, DC, you don't watch fights. I don't bother to combat it. So then you take it as fact. Because I don't say, well, no, I do, Dominick, because I feel no need to have to really tell you why or how I prepare for my fights.
Okay, so it's my interpretation.
It's your interpretation that I don't watch the fights because I don't combat that you, when you say, oh, you don't watch fights, I don't go, oh, no, Dominick, I do watch fights. So then you take that as me admitting that I don't, but the reality is I do.
You don't think it has anything to do with how you call fights that I can make that determination?
How do I call fights?
I'm just saying.
Dude, listen.
When I heard you call my fight, I don't know.
Cruz, What did I say wrong in your fight? You tell me.
Dominick then makes DC explain to Dominick what he's learned about Dominick's fighting style, which is hilarious. DC starts breaking down some of Dominick's techniques, and Dom starts acting very patronizing, making it seem like DC doesn't know nearly as much about Dom's fighting abilities as he should.
Like, what's my move you say to your knee tap? Well, how do I set it up and
no,
why?
So listen, so I'll tell you how I think you set up your knee tap. So you'll move in your stance, right? If a guy, when you're moving, just like that shit you tried to teach me that I could not get. When you move in your stance, right? If a guy gets out of position, you hit him every time. Yeah. The right hand, when you do this one combination where you split, you throw a punch, that's how you get to your double. Another one is when the guy misses, that's when you get to the underhook.
Which punch is DC?
It's the right hand. The right hand dips to the double, knee pick. Yeah. To the knee pick. It's like Dominick Cruz. I've watched you for years.
He just kind of stares at DC with a really unimpressed look on his face while he passive-aggressively responds to what DC has to say. DC reiterates to Dominick that it was wrong for him to do what he did and says that it was a really uncool thing for a coworker to do to another coworker.
It was wrong of you to say what you said this morning.
Oh, so I'm wrong.
Because that was not fair of you as a colleague to do that publicly. You tell me.
To do well,
just like you tell me.
What did I do?
Going up there, because the reality is,
what did I do?
You said, Dominick, even if you said, DC's my brother, right? You and I, brothers. They'll never come between us. We're brothers. Yep. But even if you say that, they won't run that. They won't run that you say that we're brothers.
What did they run? Because I've been doing
I don't like listening to Daniel Cormier commentate. I muted.
Dominick says it was just him giving an opinion and that he shouldn't have to apologize for having opinions.
That's not fair.
I'm not allowed to say what I feel?
I'm
wrong now I'm wrong for being
That is a blatant mistrust of a friendship and as a colleague.
Anyways, about halfway through the video, Michael Bisping joins the conversation to serve as a mediator between the two, which really elevates this video from great to awesome. They start talking about how each commentator has their own different style and that they all bring something different to the table. And I totally agree with this. If every commentator had DC's style or if every commentator had Cruz's style, then it would actually make for a terrible viewing experience for fans. And because of that, I think it's unfair for Cruz to continually harp on the fact that DC doesn't do enough homework. Just because Cruz does a lot of research doesn't mean he should expect DC to value doing research as much as he does, because there are different commentators who value different things while doing commentary. DC then straight up asks Bisping if it's okay that Dominick said what he said publicly, and Bisping agrees that it's not the way that Cruz should have gone about it out of professional courtesy.
Mike, you don't say those in the public.
No, you don't.
It's
to
accountability.
Be fair. But be careful, because he will try and fight you. He's tried to fight me many times.
He's trying to fight me, man.
Whoa.
Yeah, you look at my size and you're like, I'll pick you up, you little bastard, and throw you through the window. These exact words.
In spite of this, Dominick can't even consider the fact that he did anything wrong in this situation and just keeps asking why it was wrong for him to publicly insult his friend's jaw performance in front of the media. Like, Cruz seriously refuses to budge on this point, even when he has two of his friends and coworkers telling him that what he did was wrong. DC finally realizes that there's no way he's going to get Cruz to change his mind and ends the conversation. You know, I get the feeling that Dominick felt a little resentful towards DC for getting bigger commentary roles on the UFC pay-per-views, whereas Cruz almost always does commentary on the smaller UFC events. And again, because his ego is so big, he can't be convinced that disrespecting your friend's job performance is an L-friend behavior. Alright, so those are all of the examples that I wanted to get into. I'll say this again, I think that Cruz is a genuinely great fighter, and I also consider him to be the best bantamweight fighter of all time. But Dominick Cruz, the man, doesn't really seem like someone I'd want to hang out with that much. Like, Dominick is clearly a really intelligent guy, but I think that his big brain is still smaller than not just his ego, but the chip on his shoulder as well. And I feel like a lot of people who watch this video aren't going to be pleased with me using the term Napoleon complex to describe Dominick, but honestly, I stand by it. We've seen Dominick be extremely vindictive against Keith Peterson after the Henry Cejudo fight, where he tried to destroy Keith's reputation as a ref. We know that there have been multiple times where Cruz has tried to goad Michael Bisping into fights when he gets a little bit of alcohol in him. And the public comments that he made about Daniel Cormier plus his stubbornness when confronted about it really speaks to how big Dominick's ego can be. But with all this being said, I would actually prefer for Dominick to stay exactly the way he is, because his Napoleon complex has been responsible for creating some really memorable moments throughout the years. Anyways, I don't really know how to end this video, and we're already at 3,500 words in this script, so I'll just wrap it up here. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video.